ultimately, I mean, it doesn't really matter what round you take the player in. Once he walks in the door, he's a New England Patriot player, and he puts on the uniform and goes out there and competes. It doesn't matter if he's in the second round or the fifth round. That doesn't matter once he's on your team.
Friday edition, Pro Football Talk Live, April 16, 2021. Also happens to be Bill Belichick's birthday. Happy birthday, Coach, 69 years old. Peter King here today. Mike Florio, 2 hours, and off we go. You know, Peter, yesterday on PFTPM, we started with a little clip from Belichick, and he smiled. I did the double take. If I'd have had water in my mouth, I would have done the classic spit take. Bill Belichick smiled. He seemed a little looser yesterday. He seemed a little more friendly, a little more gregarious, although he set the bar very low over the years. I was happy to see it. It's refreshing to see Bill Belichick that way. Maybe he's realizing now that he's on the brink of 70, life's too short to be miserable and guarded all the time.
I wouldn't count on it, Mike. Look, I think one of the great things about being away from, the public part of your job for 4 months, basically, 3 months, I should say, being away from the public part of your job for that length of time, you get to basically say, hey, look, I've had a big break. Okay, we're back into it. The draft is here. And so Edelman retired. I think he had a lot of kind of happiness / goodwill stored up. And, to me, I think Bill is very good at the sort of thoughtful and pensive parts of the job. He's very bad at the dissecting a loss at the end of a game when something bad happened. I don't think the latter is ever going to change. But you're right. It was good to see him, kind of almost bright and cheerful yesterday.
Here's hoping he didn't completely empty the tank of goodwill yesterday and that maybe we'll see some more of it from time to time. But it really was refreshing to see. And the guy is one of the great coaches of all time. And who knows how much longer he will keep going. Robert Kraft told us at the league meetings 4 years ago he'd like to see Bill Belichick coach into his 80s. I know at one point Belichick said he can't imagine coaching at 70. Different feeling when you're a year away from 70. He's shown no sign of slowing down, and I think now he's rejuvenated by what they've done in the offseason as they try to rebuild and have another chapter of this run of greatness the Patriots have had. That's one of the things that compels me the most this offseason, Peter. Are we on the brink of a new era where the Patriots are dominant, or are they going to continue to struggle like we saw last year? This is so foreign to our experience in the past 2 decades. It's inherently fascinating to watch how it all plays out.
Look, I think that's one of the reasons why this draft is so important for New England. How does this draft play out? Is there going to be a quarterback that Bill Belichick likes around, let's say, 8, 9, 10? Are you going to see Bill Belichick or his dog Nike pick up the phone and call Carolina at 8, Denver at 9, or Dallas at 10 and try to move up and pick one? Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Justin Fields. What are you going to see as this draft goes on? Because, Mike, look, Bill Belichick once in his career, if you look back at the drafts he's been involved with in Cleveland and New England, Tom Brady is the ultimate outlier. The 199th pick in the 6th round of the 2000 draft, that only happens once. You can't count on Jimmy Garoppolo and Jared Stidham and all that. You can't count on that. So if you see a quarterback, and Josh McDaniels and he have been to most or all of the workouts, if you see a quarterback you like, you got to work hard to go up and get him. I am convinced that if Baker Mayfield had fallen some, in the draft 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, that the Patriots would have made a play and tried to go get him, but he would have had to fall, obviously, well past number one. And I think this is the year, being at number 15, where they're in position that they could go get a quarterback if one falls around 8, 9. And look, this is one sad list of quarterbacks. And of course, you see, when in Bill Belichick's time, this will be his 22nd draft in New England, and he's never used a first-round pick on a quarterback. I think if one of them falls to around 8, 9, 10, I think the Patriots need to move aggressively, dangle their first-round pick in 2022 to try to go up and get it.
And that really is the key, being at a starting point of 15 where it isn't quite as far to move to get into that striking distance if there's a guy you really like that slips through. Let's hear Belichick himself from yesterday, some of that goodwill that made its way into his assessment of what the Patriots' options are as they hold the 15th overall selection in the 2021 draft.
I think that each draft's a little bit different, and so each year is a little bit different. But all that being said, at 15, I think we could eliminate a few players that won't be at 15. And then you could look at a couple scenarios and say, well, if, these 3 players are there, which one would we take? If these other 3 different players were there, which one would you take? You go through that exercise and talk about that. But I would say normally now there's less options at 15 than there are 28, 30, 31, some other spots that we've drafted from. But I would say normally something will happen, and there could very well be a player there that either you don't expect to be there, or maybe he is a couple spots, maybe at 12, 13, he's still on the board, and you really thought that he'd be gone in the top 6, 7 picks. And then then the question comes, do you move up and try to get that player that's fallen a little bit?
It occurred to me yesterday when we played that sound on PFTPM that if you took that transcript and gave it to Frank Caliendo and said, read this like John Madden, it would work, because there was a lot of obvious there, and I could see that whole rhythm and pattern fitting Coach Madden's way of explaining things. But he's right. He's right. They're at 15. They're rarely at 15. They're starting in a spot that allows them to get into the top 10 if that guy they like busts through. And part of the challenge here is you're going to have teams in the top 10 that are tempted to overdraft quarterbacks, reach for quarterbacks, go earlier than they should in the hopes of getting lucky and finding a franchise guy. That's part of the philosophy that they're competing with as they apply that more strategic aspect to it. And Peter, we saw them break from character in free agency. Maybe they do break from character. Maybe they do have an element of roll the dice. They want their franchise guy. They're willing to take their chance. We're going to be at 15, ideally once every 40 years. Let's take advantage of that spot. Let's move up. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll find another way.
I think the other part of this that's going to be really interesting, Mike, is how aggressive are teams down in the round, as well as how aggressive will the Patriots be, because right below them at 19, you've got Washington. At 20, you've got Chicago. Both of those teams, I think Chicago's probably less likely, to pillage future drafts to move up for a quarterback. But I'm not so sure about Washington. I think Washington is sort of laying there in the weeds. When you look at pick number 19 right now, how much is Washington willing to affect future drafts if a quarterback that they like a lot is going to be there around, around 11, 12, 13? Could they move up? Could they leapfrog New England And you know what, Mike? The one other thing about New England is they do the best job, in my opinion, of any team in the NFL of hiding their intentions before the draft. So I'm not going to know. You're not going to know. We're just, we're going to have to wait until they open the gifts on Christmas Day in 13 days.
Yeah, Chris Sims has explained in the past that when he worked there, how the circle of people who actually knew what Belichick's board was extremely small, and they kept that information away from anyone else in the building. People who otherwise would be trusted, not trusted with that information. A little extra pressure in the building this year by virtue of comments that were made a couple of weeks back from owner Robert Kraft. Candid, biting criticism of the team's recent experiences in the draft, inability to draft, and ability to develop as well. I think that's part of it we need to keep in mind. Here's Bill Belichick talking about the struggles that the Patriots have had on draft day in recent years.
Well, we're always looking to get better. Always try to evaluate everything we do and try to find a better way to do it. So that's I would say an annual process with the draft, but it's something that we do on a regular basis throughout the course of the season, whether it's, whatever period of time it is. So, always looking to do a better job. There were some things that last year that were unique to the draft process. As I mentioned, some of those are similar this year. Some of them are a little bit different. So we, certainly use some of that experience to improve the process a little bit this year. At least we felt we improved it this year. But ultimately, we're still going to try to, evaluate the players and make the decisions that we feel like are best for the football team.
The departure of Nick Caserio, the VP of Player Personnel since 2009, forced some of those changes, but also the first-round picks the team has exercised in recent years, getting them to take a closer look at what they're doing, how they're doing it. There was a report from Albert Breer a couple of weeks ago that Bill Belichick went off the board to take N'Keal Harry at receiver in the first round 2 years ago when A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel were more highly rated by the team's scouts. And, Peter, the other angle of this that fascinates me, Belichick talked about how Matt Patricia, the former Lions coach, who before that was a longtime assistant coach in New England, is heavily involved in the draft. And as of a couple of weeks ago, there were reports that Patricia was negotiating free agent contracts, signing his name to the deals like the Cam Newton contract. Patricia's becoming like another version of Ernie Adams, where we're not really quite sure what he does, but he's doing a lot of things to support the cause in New England.
When Matt Patricia interviewed for a job with the Rams a few years ago, I think it was the year that they hired Sean McVay. In their round of interviews that year, Patricia was interviewed by the Rams, and the Rams walked away. And I remember thinking this at the time, what an odd kind of conclusion. But the Rams walked away and said, Matt Patricia would be a really good general manager. He sees the entire organization, and a lot of their conversation that day was about that. And Mike, I want to go back on one of the things that you said before Belichick's last bite, and that is this. I will never forget covering the draft 10 years ago. I was not in Foxborough, or I wasn't around the Patriots, but I do remember one very specific story about that draft. That was a draft they took Nate Solder in the first round, and in the second round, they had a high second round pick, and they chose a cornerback, an oft-injured cornerback from Virginia named Ross I. Dowling. And when that pick was made, a lot of the team scouts, who are, as you say, in New England, it is a need-to-know basis organization. Those guys do not know what Bill Belichick's board says. And jaws hit the floor when they picked Ross I. Dowling, because the scouts were positive that year they were going to take a pass rusher like Jabal Sheard or Brooks Reed. And when they heard that pick, they had no idea whatsoever that Ross I. Dowling was even in play, to get picked. And so that's why, it's somebody, for people who say, man, if you have good sources inside the Patriots, this is the year you got to use them. I don't think it matters. There's only one source inside the Patriots, and he's not going to talk before the draft. So, at least talk openly, honestly. So I do think this is really one of the mystery teams going into the draft, as it is every year.
And Peter, it reminds me of the story from a couple of years ago when Mike Mayock was the GM of the Raiders for his first draft. And it was a big deal for a news cycle or two that they sent everyone else home the week before the draft. And Sims and I concluded that was motivated in large part by the fact that John Gruden can't keep his mouth shut in the building and feels compelled to go around office to office talking coach to coach and scout to scout to make sure that they agree with how he sees things. Belichick doesn't need that. He's got so much conviction in what he believes, and maybe to a fault. Maybe he would benefit from getting the perspective of others. He just doesn't trust them, so he doesn't share it, and that could lead to some of these decisions like in N'Keal Harry, where he really didn't talk it through with anyone because he didn't want anyone to know what he was thinking.
Look, there's a long line of decisions that have been made over the years by people who don't want anybody else to know. The year that Mike Shanahan chose Jay Cutler in the draft, nobody in his organization knew until 11 o'clock that morning. And I mean nobody, not even ownership. And so that's how you keep a secret. You talk about Mike Mayock in that particular draft, you're absolutely right, Mike. He didn't want anybody in the organization knowing what they were going to do and calling their buddies on other teams. But I also think there was another reason, too, that by that time, Mike Mayock had determined that there were X number of scouts and some people who probably weren't going to be around very long, with the Raiders, either for whatever reason. He had somebody else he thought could do a better job. Maybe these guys had gotten used to cutting corners with the Raiders over the years. Who knows? But I do recall that very specifically, and I really remember because I was in Oakland after the first round of that draft and had a long conversation with Mayock. Mayock was very convinced that this organization had to get the ability to keep secrets. And so I think you and Chris were right in what you thought.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.